Hey, what's up? This is Chosen, and this video is going to be ranking Diablo 3 versus Path of Exile, so let's get into it. Alrighty, really quick before I get into actually showing the results of the rankings, I'm just going to talk about kind of how I did it. I didn't want to have the video just be my opinion, because I don't consider myself an expert in Path of Exile, and B, I didn't want it to be one person's opinion because that can be biased in any sort of direction. So what I did for this was I spent a lot of time on this. I found some of the most expert players I could find that play both games, like people who have 1,000 hours in both Diablo 3 and Path of Exile, people who have been highly ranked in both games, people who know a lot, know the ins and outs of both games, and have them rank Diablo 3 versus Path of Exile in 10 different categories. I'll show all those here in a second when I pull up the actual rankings. I set up a survey with a slider system where Diablo 3 was on one side, Path of Exile was on the other side, and you could adjust the slider towards each game that you thought was better or worse in that category. And then I added up all the totals and boiled it down to an average result. And then that's kind of how I did it. So this ranking isn't going to be my opinion. It's going to be an opinion of a bunch of different experts in the game. I'm in Clan NCG for Diablo 3, which has won every season on Hardcore Seasonal on Americas. So I'm lucky enough to kind of be around and know a lot of the high-ranked RPG players for Diablo 3, but a lot of them are also very good at Path of Exile. So I reached out to a few of these people and asked, hey, can you fill this out, rank Diablo 3 versus Path of Exile in all these different categories for me? And then I kind of averaged the results. So I'm going to talk about how I feel about the rankings compared to kind of what they did. So let's just show the results. Alrighty, and here is kind of the full results mapped out of the different categories. And they're kind of loosely sorted from top to bottom in what I thought was kind of the most important categories. So, you have developer interaction is just how much communication and transparency and updating is done from the developers to the community and all that. Then character building is the amount of theory crafting and customization, viability of all sorts of different builds. End game is, how fun it is to farm once you've hit kind of max level or you've gotten deep into the game and you're farming for end game material. Graphics and smoothness is how good the game looks while you're playing it, how it performs. User interface and polish is kind of how simple the game is to navigate from a user standpoint, looking at the menus and tabbing through everything involved with different screens of the game. Seasons and leagues, excuse me, is the different iterations of resetting the game and having new leagues for people to start from scratch. Competition and leaderboards is avenues for players to compete against one another in different sort of rankings and leaderboard systems. Beginner friendly is how easy it is for a beginner to kind of dive in and pick up the game and start playing. Expert friendly is how long the game can keep your attention once you've gotten past the initial learning curve. Leveling process is when you're starting a new character, how enjoyable it is to level up the character to the point of endgame. So that just kind of details all the different categories, and I'll just start at the top and kind of give my reaction to how it was ranked. Dev interaction, I don't argue with. Path of Exile coming out getting 48% more points in this category. And by the way, the max score is 50 because when I did this, the slider was on a scale of 0 to 100, and a tie would be right in the middle at 50, and a sliding 50 to one side would be max. So I agree with this. I think that this bar should be mostly slid completely towards Path of Exile. Path of Exile is grinding gear games basically only thing they're focusing on, so they throw a lot of attention into it and they're really killing it as far as releasing constant content and keeping up with the game, whereas Blizzard, Diablo 3 is obviously not their priority right now. So I agree with this ranking. Character building, I agree with for the most part. I think there's a a lot more customization in Path of Exile. I would maybe slide it a little bit towards Diablo because you have the ability to change more easily, but I would still have this be about plus 30% for Path of Exile. Endgame, I can kind of agree with. I would maybe have it not be so severe, maybe like plus 35% for Path of Exile. Graphics and smoothness, I would have had this slid more towards Diablo 3. I would have had this be like plus 35% for Diablo 3. I just think Diablo 3 performs, it just feels more clean during gameplay on Diablo 3. User interface and polish, I would have had this be like plus 30% towards Diablo 3. I would have ranked it a little bit more towards Diablo 3 for this one because Path of Exile is a little bit more wonky when it comes to grouping up, partnering up, adding friends. I think the user interface is much more friendly on the Diablo 3 side. Seasons and leagues comes at plus 36% for Path of Exile. I wouldn't have had it be quite that severe. I would have had it be like plus 25% for Path of Exile because I do think the beginning of a Diablo 3 season is extremely fun. So I would have kind of slid that about plus 25% towards PoE. Competition and leaderboards comes out at basically a tie, which I think is fairly accurate. I personally would have slid it just a little bit towards Diablo 3, probably at about 10%. I think it's a little bit more sortable and concrete, and there's more leaderboards, you know, 2-player, 3-player, 4-player, and all the different classes and stuff. So I would have slid that a little bit more towards Diablo 3. Beginner friendly, I think this is accurate. Diablo 3 is much easier for a beginner to kind of pick up and learn and get going and figure out how to play the game, so I agree there. Expert friendly, I agree for the most part. I probably wouldn't have had it be quite that severe. I probably would have had it like plus 35% for Path of Exile. Leveling process is pretty neutral for both games. I would have probably had this be like plus 10% towards Diablo 3, so I would have slid it a little bit in the other direction. I think Diablo 3 having adventure mode is a big thing for me on the leveling process. You're not forced to play through the campaign, so having adventure mode is what would have slid that category towards Diablo 3. And then if we look at the total, we've got Path of Exile comes out at plus 12.8% more points than Diablo 3. So even though I personally think Diablo 3 comes out better for me, I wanted this to be unbiased, so I got a lot of other people's opinions, and I'm going to have to give it to Path of Exile on this. It does grade out as 12.8% better of a game as of right now compared to Diablo 3. If I get time to try out Path of Exile more, I will. I have about 150 hours or so on Path of Exile, but if I get the time in between, you know, Diablo 3 content, I will try at some point to dive in and give Path of Exile a better shot and kind of put some more hours into it and develop more into the end game. But yeah, in conclusion, I just wanted to kind of say I agree for the most part. I would have had the total come out to like plus 5% towards Path of Exile. So in my opinion, both games are very good. Both games are worth giving a shot and seeing which one you like better. Definitely let me know down in the comments what you think, if you agree, if you disagree, if you are an expert of both games, if you have played both. I'd love to hear what everybody thinks. So yeah, anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Have a good rest of your day. Peace.